Grace, mercy, and peace to you from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. So I had a crazy yet awesome Sunday a week ago. After I left you all Sunday morning, I had planned, I do this a couple times a year, a sermon series planning retreat where we sort of plan out the sermon series. I do it with another pastor friend of mine for like the next 6 months. And we had this plan for a couple months, and we always go over to Daytona to do it. And we were over there getting ready to plan. And so what I did, I left church, I went home, I changed, I grabbed lunch real quick, and I started driving over to Daytona, and it was pouring down rain the whole way. Now, a couple of things to understand what happened on Sunday is back when I was in seminary, there's one friend of mine who I was going to meet to plan out sermon series with. I, and a whole bunch of other guys on Sunday afternoons would gather together and watch the NASCAR races. It was a relaxing way. I'm not like an over big NASCAR fan, but I liked hanging out with people. So I kind of hung out with them. In our fourth year of seminary, our last year of seminary, we decided, it so happened that our spring break, our like sort of winter spring break, fell over the Daytona 500. And so a whole group of us, back in like 2010, 2011, came down, went to the Daytona 500, knowing that we'd never be able to do that on a Sunday again unless we took vacation. And it was a great time. And so I'm going over, not even thinking really that the Daytona 500 is going on as I'm driving over. It's pouring down rain. We get over to Daytona, and my friend goes to me. He goes, "You know what they did to the Daytona 500 today?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "It's raining. They don't run in the rain. They ran 11 laps and pulled the red flag and stopped the race." He goes, "We should go tonight. They're going to run it tonight." And I was like, no, there's no way you can possibly get tickets 4 hours after the race starts. And he goes, "Let's check and see." And it turns out when you buy NASCAR tickets 4 hours after the race starts, guess what? They're practically giving them away because they don't think anybody's going to come. So last minute, we bought these race tickets, and I got to watch the last 189 laps of the Daytona 500. It was awesome. Like I'm the planner. Yeah, it was. I was like, wow, it was fun. I'm not a huge NASCAR fan, but my friend there, he's like a huge NASCAR fan. So his energy just like flowed over to me, and we watched pretty much all but the first 11 laps of the race, and we were able to walk right in. There was no lines at security. It was awesome. Got to see it under the lights. And some of you might be NASCAR fans, but I'm kind of back into it now because after you're at the Daytona 500, like, this is pretty amazing, right? All this horsepower and the smells of the tires and the engines, it's pretty awesome. And so I've been reading a little bit more about NASCAR this last week, kind of like I haven't really watched NASCAR in like the last 15 years or so, but this week I was reading a lot about it, and it was kind of a controversial ending to the Daytona 500. I don't know if any of you guys are big NASCAR fans. If you were, you probably saw this on TV. My friend that's with me, he's a big Joe Gibbs racing fan, a big Denny Hamlin fan, which a lot of people are like, "Ooh, I hate Denny Hamlin." But he loves Denny Hamlin. And he was super excited because as they went to the white flag, the last lap of the race, Denny Hamlin was either like in first place or second place. He was set to win. He'd run a good race. He'd done everything that he was supposed to do. And as he came around the back stretch around the track, he made a move to kind of block, to secure his place in first place. He was going to win the race. But did anybody watch the Daytona 500 on Sunday? What happened? He got wrecked. He got wrecked when he was like in first or second place. And the guy that was in ninth place starting the last lap, William Byron, came around and he won the race. Now, William Byron is a good race car driver, so if you're a William Byron fan, that's okay. But he started the last lap in ninth place. And so Denny Hamlin on Monday went on his podcast and was complaining to NASCAR about all these new rules they had that caused them to be so bunched up on the last lap, where he goes, when you win a race, you want the winning driver to give an interview to talk about the great moves that he did to win a race. I came around turn 4, I cut the guy off, I swerved here and I zigged here, and then I won the race because I'm a great driver. But when William Byron won the race in Victory Lane, they're like, so how'd you win the race? He goes, I don't know, I made it through the wreck. It was basically luck. And some of you guys that don't like NASCAR are like, yep, that's why I don't watch NASCAR. But Denny Hamlin had a problem because he thought in order to win the race, in order to get the victory, it should be based upon what you do, not just pure luck, or maybe I might say a gift that was given by the 8 cars in front of you wrecking and you happening to be there to pull in the checkered flag. And I tell that big, long story because I think that sometimes in our faith, we're a lot like Denny Hamlin. And we want our faith and the blessings we get from God to be based upon what we did. I believe this, I did this, and I did that, and therefore God is blessing me. But what we see as we look at the scriptures, as we look at Jesus, that's not how faith works. Faith is a gift that God gives to us. As we go through Matthew, we're kind of looking at Matthew chapter 14, 15, and the first half of chapter 16 this week. I encourage you to read that at home. We see that so many people, whether it be the disciples or the Pharisees, they're misguided in what true faith is, thinking it's based upon what they do rather than this gift that's given to them. I want to kind of, at 30,000 feet, kind of zoom over a couple of these stories in Matthew 14 and 15 and 16, but then hone in on the one story that was our gospel lesson. One of the stories that we have there, they all deal with crumbs, by the way, and one of the stories that we have there is Jesus feeding the 5,000. This is one that many of us know. The disciples are out in the middle of nowhere, and all these people, 5,000 men, are around them, and they're crowding in on the disciples, and the disciples are like, Jesus, you got to send all these people away. We don't have food to feed all these people. It's getting late. There's no Publix around. There's no Walmart around. There's no McDonald's around. Send them away. And they don't have faith to see what Jesus can do. But remember what Jesus does? He takes pretty much the crumbs. He takes 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He gives thanks. He blesses them. And then all of a sudden they feed everybody. And there's 12 basketfuls left over of food. Yet the disciples, even though they'd been following Jesus, they didn't have faith to believe and see what Jesus could do. Yet we see that the crumbs are enough. The abundance of God breaks in. Another story that we look at there is Peter walking on the water, or I might say Jesus walking on the water and Peter sinking into the water. Many of you have heard this story before. Jesus is out and the disciples are terrified. They're like, is that a ghost walking on the water? And they find out that it's Jesus, and Peter gets out of the boat. And at first, Peter is walking on water. He has faith to see and trust in Jesus. This amazing thing is happening. But then what does Peter start doing? His rational mind starts thinking, and he's like, wait, I'm on water. Oh, this shouldn't be right. And he starts sinking into the water as he starts thinking about what he is doing rather than looking at what Jesus is doing. And Jesus, you can see him here, he reaches down and he pulls Peter up out of the water as he's sinking into the depths. He says, you of little faith. Peter, even the great Peter, the apostle Peter, the disciple Peter, doesn't have the faith. He's looking at what he's doing. A little bit later on in that section, you get the Pharisees, the religious leaders. They come up to Jesus, and man, they know the rules. They know the regulations. They look like they're the people of faith. They look like they have it all right. They're focusing on the things they do and the good things that they think they're doing and the bad things they think they're not doing. And they're all wrapped up in these rules and these regulations for how their faith is better than everybody else's. Yet Jesus calls them out. I think I got a Bible verse coming. There we go. And he says this. He says, it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles a person. In other words, outside you're following all these rules and these regulations. You look like you have all this faith, but in reality, in your heart, what comes out of you who is unclean. You guys, even you righteous-looking Pharisees, you seem to lack the faith. And then immediately after that, we get into our gospel lesson today. This woman, this Canaanite woman, comes up to Jesus, and she's got a problem because her daughter is possessed by a demon. Now we need to pause on this one a little bit to understand the backstory of the Canaanites. The Canaanites weren't Jewish. In fact, in the Old Testament, the Canaanites were like horrifically worshiping these false gods. They were worshiping these false gods. God had given them chance after chance, and they were worshiping these false gods. So God basically commanded the Israelites to destroy them. Now, the Israelites were unfaithful as well, and they didn't listen to God at that point. So the Canaanites were still around, but they were these horrible people. If you were a Jewish person, you would have hated the Canaanites. They should have been destroyed. They worshiped false gods. They didn't follow your rules. They didn't eat the right foods. And to make matters worse, when Jesus meets this Canaanite woman, he goes to this place in the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now, there's a famous Old Testament character that's from the same place as that. Her name is Jezebel. Anybody, when you hear of a Jezebel, what do you think of? Like an upstanding person, right? No. When you hear the term Jezebel, you're thinking, boo, right? There's nothing good that can come out of Jezebel's region. Now, this is different generations. She's not alive at this time, but that's the same region, the same area that Jesus is in when this Canaanite woman comes up to Jesus and says, Jesus, have mercy on me. And she doesn't just say Jesus. It's interesting what she says. She cries out, have mercy on me, O Lord. And she uses this term, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. Now that term, Son of David, was reserved for the Jewish Messiah, the one that the Jewish people believed was going to make all things right for them. And at that point, the disciples really weren't even calling Jesus Son of David yet. They didn't quite see it yet. Yet this Canaanite woman, this foreigner, this good-for-nothing Canaanite woman comes up and uses the term for the Messiah to cry out to Jesus, Son of David. In other words, I know you're the one that can make all things right. Have mercy on me. Come and heal my daughter. And we as 21st century Americans are like, yes, that's God's grace. Like, go heal her, Jesus. But that's not how you would have received it if you were one of the original audiences that Matthew is writing to. If you would have been part of Israel or part of the Jewish audience that Matthew is speaking to, they'd be like, what? What is this Canaanite woman coming up to our Messiah and asking him to heal her daughter? Jesus, you better put her in your place. You better let her know that you're Israel's Messiah. You better let her know that you came for Israel first. And yeah, maybe you're supposed to bless the entire world. We're not quite sure how all that's going to work out. But this woman, this Canaanite woman, has no right to come up to you, Jesus. And that's what the disciples say. And Jesus pretty much responds and says, yeah, you know, I did come to fulfill the Jewish prophecy that I came to be the Messiah for Israel, to make all things right in the line of David, to make all things right for Israel. And he pretty much says that. And then he says to the woman this. He says, it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Which when we read this, we're like, man, Jesus, that's a little harsh. But if you would have been Jewish living back then, or an Israelite living back then, you would have been like, yeah, Jesus, you just called her a dog. Put her in her place. She shouldn't have experienced the grace of Jesus. She shouldn't have had any faith in Jesus. She should have just left, but she doesn't leave. And she responds this, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Sure, Jesus, Son of David, you did come to fulfill the prophecy given to Israel. You did come for them, but Jesus, your grace, your love is so great that even if I could just have the crumbs, Even if I could just eat the crumbs, that would be enough to bring your righteousness to me. That would bring enough to heal my daughter. And sure enough, look at this. Jesus answers her, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. Remember the disciples feeding the 5,000. The 12 followers of Jesus, they lacked faith. Peter, as he walks on the water, or I might say sinks into the water next to Jesus, Jesus even says, "Oh, you of little faith." All these Pharisees with their outward expressions of piety, Jesus is like, no, you guys are actually unclean. You guys actually lack the faith. But then you get this dirty Canaanite woman that shouldn't have any faith at all. And what does Jesus say? Great is your faith. Because she looks to Jesus and she understands it's not about getting everything right, but simply the grace of God, which is so big that even if she could have the crumbs of his grace, it would be enough. And those crumbs bring healing to her daughter. And from there, it's really interesting because those crumbs go out, and then there's more people crowding around Jesus, and you have the feeding of the 4,000, which kind of, I think, represents like the four edges of the earth coming to Jesus, all these Gentiles coming to Jesus. And sure enough, he feeds the 4,000, and there's 7 baskets of food left over. The crumbs are enough. Now, it's interesting because I think Matthew's first readers reading this and hearing this, Jesus is the people that were there, the disciples that were there. This would have been Jesus stepping on their toes. They would have been thinking, no, we've done all the right things. We've followed all the right rules. We deserve the victory, Jesus. We deserve the blessings. Jesus, remember, it was Israel you made the promise to. You called our grandfather Abraham. He followed you. Our ancestors that were in Egypt, you were the one that rescued them, and they followed you. And now we have all the rules. We have all the rules. We do what you're supposed to do, Jesus. You know, we eat the right things. We don't eat the pork like those Canaanites do. We don't eat the shrimp or any of those animals that just kind of scour around looking for food. We don't eat them. They're unclean. We're better than them. And man, we sacrifice in the temple. We say the right prayers. We do all the right things. But then all of a sudden, this woman who doesn't do any of that, this Canaanite woman comes up to Jesus and says, "But your grace, your crumbs are enough." And all of a sudden, she experiences that healing. I think this should step on our toes as well. Because how easy is it for us to get self-righteous and say, "Oh, well, we're the Christians. We're the ones that actually know right from wrong." I mean, yes, look at us right now. It's 9:15 in the morning, and look what we're doing. We're sitting in church. We're not like the heathens out there playing pickleball or whatever they're doing. I don't even know what people do on Sunday mornings. Look at us. I mean, and we know right from wrong. You know, there's the 10 Commandments. And we're the Lutherans, by the way. We actually number the 10 Commandments properly, unlike our Baptist friends down the street. We get it right. We deserve these blessings from God because of us, and we get all self-righteous. But what we see, we're not saved by what we do. We're not saved by getting it all right, but we're saved because the grace of Jesus is so large for us that even when we get it wrong, the crumbs are enough and are what saves us and what saves our neighbors that are out there. That when Jesus goes to the cross and he suffers and he dies, it's for those of us with weak faith who don't have it all together. For while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, and he rose for us. And we see that the crumbs are enough to make all things right for you and me. Not because we do it right, but simply because it's a gift. Absolutely, right? The crumbs are enough. We see that with the 5,000. There's 12 baskets left over. We see it with the 4,000. There's 7 baskets left over. We see it with this woman who takes the crumbs and her daughter is healed. And whatever you're going through, God's love is so big and so much enough for you that even the crumbs are enough for you to make things right. It's backwards. It's beautiful.